A slave born in chains would become one of the most influential philosophers in human history, teaching emperors and shaping how we think about freedom, suffering, and what it means to live well. His name was Epictetus, and nearly 2,000 years after his death, his words still echo through our courtrooms, our therapy sessions, and the quiet moments when we ask ourselves how to endure what we cannot change. We know almost nothing about his early years with certainty. The historical record is frustratingly thin, but we know he was born around 50 AD in Hierapolis, a city in what is now Turkey, a place of hot springs and Roman temples, of merchants and slaves, of marble columns and human misery existing side by side. His mother's name is lost to history. His father's name is lost. Even his birth name might not have been Epictetus. The word means acquired one in Greek, a name given to property, not people. He was born into slavery. Not captured in war, not sold for debt, but born into it. His mother was a slave, and Roman law was absolute on this point. The child of a slave woman belonged to her master, regardless of who the father was. From his first breath, Epictetus was property. He could be bought, sold, beaten, or killed at his owner's discretion. He had no legal rights, no protection, no future that wasn't determined by someone else's will. The city where he spent his earliest years sat in the province of Phrygia, a region that had seen empires rise and fall for centuries. The Persians had ruled there once, then Alexander's Greeks. Now Rome held it with an iron grip, extracting taxes and tribute, maintaining order through military force, and the ever-present threat of crucifixion for those who challenged authority. Hierapolis itself was prosperous, famous for its therapeutic springs, where Romans came to bathe in waters they believed could heal diseases. The city thrived on this trade, on the constant flow of visitors seeking relief from ailments, both real and imagined. But for a slave child, none of this mattered. The marble facades and healing waters existed in a different world, one he could see but never truly inhabit. He would have worked from the moment he was old enough to be useful, cleaning, carrying, serving, whatever tasks his small hands could manage. Childhood, as we understand it, did not exist for slave children. They were investments, future labour, bodies to be put to work as soon as physically possible. At some point, possibly in his teenage years, Epictetus was taken to Rome. The circumstances are unknown. Perhaps his master relocated, perhaps he was sold. The journey itself would have been brutal, weeks of walking or sailing across the Mediterranean, chains and fear and uncertainty about what awaited at the end. Rome in the 1st century was the centre of the known world. A city of perhaps 1 million people, the largest urban centre humanity had yet created. Its wealth was staggering, its cruelty equally so. The master who owned Epictetus in Rome was a man named Epictetus. He was himself a freedman, someone who had once been a slave but had gained his freedom and risen to considerable power. Epictetus served in the imperial household, working directly for Emperor Nero, one of the most unpredictable and dangerous rulers in Roman history. This was a man who had ordered his own mother killed, who executed senators on whims, who would eventually force his former tutor Seneca to commit suicide. Proximity to such power was both opportunity and existential threat. Living in Epictetus's household meant Epictetus witnessed the machinery of imperial power up close. He saw how decisions made in marble halls destroyed lives in the streets below. He watched powerful men grovel before the emperor, saw wealthy senators reduced to terrified supplicants, observed the arbitrary nature of fortune in a world where everything could change with a single imperial decree. These observations would later shape his philosophy in profound ways. There's a story about Epictetus from these years, preserved by later writers, though its authenticity is debated. According to the tale, Epictetus was twisting Epictetus's leg, either as punishment or perhaps simply because he could, an exercise of absolute power over powerless flesh. As the pressure increased, Epictetus calmly remarked, "You're going to break it." The master continued. The leg broke. And Epictetus said, "I told you that you would break it." No anger, no pleading, just a simple statement of fact. The story might be apocryphal, a later invention to illustrate his philosophy, but the injury itself was real. Epictetus walked with a severe limp for the rest of his life, his body carrying the permanent mark of his enslavement. Whether the leg was broken in a single moment of cruelty or damaged gradually through years of harsh labour and poor treatment, what matters is that he bore this physical limitation from his youth, a constant reminder of what had been done to him, of what he had survived. Yet somewhere in the chaos of Nero's Rome, in a household where violence was casual and freedom was a dream, Epictetus encountered something that would change everything. He was given permission, or perhaps directed, to attend the lectures of a Stoic philosopher named Musonius Rufus. This decision, whether made by Epictetus himself or by his master, altered the trajectory of not just his life, but of Western philosophy itself. Musonius Rufus was unusual for a Roman philosopher. While most teachers of his era came from wealthy families and lectured to the aristocratic elite, Musonius taught that philosophy was for everyone. Slaves could be philosophers, women could be philosophers. Philosophy wasn't about abstract speculation or clever arguments. It was about how to live, how to maintain your integrity in a world designed to break you, how to remain free even when your body belonged to someone else. The core teachings of Stoicism must have resonated with a young slave in ways that no free Roman could fully understand. The Stoics divided all things into two categories: what is within our control and what is not. Your body, not in your control. Your reputation, not in your control. Your circumstances, your past, what others do to you, none of it in your control. The only thing truly yours is your faculty of choice, your ability to decide how you will respond to whatever happens. Everything else is external, indifferent, ultimately powerless to harm your inner self unless you grant it that power. For someone living in chains, this wasn't abstract philosophy, it was survival. Epictetus could not control whether his leg was broken. He could not control his enslavement. He could not change the circumstances of his birth or the cruelty of his master, but he could control his judgment about these things. He could refuse to see himself as degraded by what others did to his body. He could maintain his dignity in his own mind, the one place where no master's authority reached. The Stoics taught that the universe is rational, ordered by divine providence, though their conception of the divine was quite different from traditional religion. They saw God not as a bearded figure on a throne, but as the rational principle that pervades all of existence, the logos that gives structure to reality. Everything that happens for a reason, part of a cosmic order that is ultimately good even when individual events appear evil. Our job is not to demand that the world conform to our wishes, but to align our will with reality, to want what happens to happen, to flow with the river rather than exhausting ourselves fighting the current. This doctrine could sound like resignation, like an excuse for accepting injustice. But for the Stoics, it was something else entirely. It was about recognizing where your power actually lies. You cannot change the past. You cannot control other people. You cannot stop the universe from operating according to its nature, but you can change your relationship to all of this. You can stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as someone responding with wisdom and dignity to circumstances beyond your control. Epictetus absorbed these teachings with an intensity that few other students matched. While wealthy Romans attended philosophical lectures as intellectual entertainment, a pleasant diversion before dinner parties and political maneuvering, Epictetus studied as if his life depended on it, because in a sense it did. Philosophy wasn't a hobby for him. It was the difference between maintaining his humanity and being crushed by his circumstances. He learned that virtue excellence of character is the only true good. Wealth, health, reputation, even freedom in the legal sense, these are preferred indifferents, better to have them than not, all else being equal, but not actually necessary for living well. A slave can be free in the only way that matters, free in his judgments, free in his moral choices. An emperor can be enslaved to his fears and desires, trapped by the very power that others envy. The chains that matter are the ones we forge ourselves through our attachments and false beliefs about what has the power to harm us. The years in Epaphroditus' household exposed Epictetus to the highest and lowest aspects of Roman society. He saw the emperor's court up close during the final years of Nero's reign. He witnessed the increasing paranoia, the purges of real and imagined enemies, the descent into madness that characterized Nero's last days. In 68 AD, Nero committed suicide as his regime collapsed, ending the Julio-Claudian dynasty that had ruled Rome since Augustus. The year that followed saw 4 different men claim the imperial throne in rapid succession, armies marching on Rome, civil war tearing the empire apart. Through all this chaos, Epictetus remained a slave. The philosophical training he received from Musonius Rufus was deepening his understanding, but it hadn't changed his legal status. He still belonged to Epaphroditus, still lived at the mercy of a master who had the legal right to do with him as he pleased. The question of when and how Epictetus gained his freedom is one of the great mysteries of his biography. We know that at some point, probably during the reign of Vespasian, who stabilized the empire after the civil war, Epictetus became a freedman. The circumstances are lost. Did Epaphroditus grant him freedom as a reward for years of service? Did Epictetus purchase his freedom with money earned through teaching if he was allowed to accept students even while enslaved? Did his growing reputation as a philosopher make it embarrassing for Epaphroditus to continue owning him? We simply don't know. What we know is that by his 30s, Epictetus was free according to Roman law, no longer property, no longer subject to a master's arbitrary will. Yet freedom brought its own complications. A freedman in Rome occupied an ambiguous social position, neither slave nor fully free citizen. There were legal restrictions on freedmen, limits on their political participation, marks of their former status that could never be fully erased. And Epictetus carried other marks as well. His damaged leg, his foreign accent, his lack of family connections or inherited wealth. He would never be accepted by the Roman aristocracy as an equal, would never have the social standing that birth alone conferred in that rigidly hierarchical society. But he had something else. He had philosophy, and he had begun to teach. The details of his early teaching career are fragmentary, but we know that students sought him out, that his reputation was growing, that he was becoming known as someone who had lived the philosophy he taught. This wasn't a wealthy academic who spoke about hardship from the comfort of inherited wealth. This was someone who had actually endured, who had maintained his dignity through circumstances that would have broken most people, whose every word carried the weight of lived experience. The year 89 AD brought a crisis that would transform Epictetus from a teacher in Rome to an exile on the margins of empire. The Emperor Domitian, suspicious and increasingly paranoid, issued a decree that would reshape the philosophical landscape of the ancient world. Philosophers were to be expelled from Rome and from Italy itself. The reasons were complex. Philosophy had always made Roman authorities nervous. It taught people to think for themselves, to question authority, to place reason above custom. Some philosophers had been involved in conspiracies, had criticized emperors too openly, had encouraged resistance to tyranny. Whether Domitian genuinely feared philosophical subversion or simply wanted to eliminate potential critics, we cannot know. What matters is the result. Epictetus, now in his 50s, was forced to leave. Everything he'd built in Rome, his school, his students, his network of relationships, all of it had to be abandoned. For the second time in his life, circumstances beyond his control were stripping away what he had. The first time he'd been born into slavery. Now he was being driven from the only home he'd known as a free man. He went to Nicopolis, a city on the western coast of Greece. It was a strange place for exile. Founded by Augustus to commemorate his victory at the Battle of Actium, Nicopolis was wealthy, cosmopolitan, strategically located on the trade routes between Rome and the East. It wasn't a remote backwater. It was a thriving city that attracted merchants, travellers, and students from across the Mediterranean. But it wasn't Rome. For a teacher, whose students had included members of the Roman elite, whose reputation had been built in the intellectual centre of the world, Nicopolis must have seemed like a diminishment. He was 55 years old, lame, forced to start over in a foreign city, and yet something remarkable happened. Within a few years, Epictetus had established a school in Nicopolis that became more famous than his Roman academy had ever been. Students travelled from across the empire to study with him. Young men from aristocratic families, future generals and administrators, philosophers seeking wisdom from someone who'd lived through more than most teachers could imagine. What was it about Epictetus that drew them? Part of it was certainly his biography. In an age obsessed with authenticity, here was a man whose philosophy wasn't theory. He'd been a slave. He'd suffered physical injury. He'd been exiled. When he spoke about maintaining dignity in the face of hardship, he wasn't speculating. He'd done it, but there was more. Epictetus had developed a teaching method that was unlike anything else in the philosophical schools of his time. He didn't lecture from prepared texts. He didn't simply explain the writings of Zeno or Chrysippus, the founders of Stoicism. He engaged directly with his students, questioned them, challenged their assumptions, forced them to confront the contradictions between what they claimed to believe and how they actually lived. The sessions could be brutal. A wealthy young man would arrive expecting to discuss abstract metaphysics and find himself confronted with questions about his own character. Why are you here? What do you actually want? Are you seeking wisdom or just the appearance of being educated? When you say you want to be good, what does that mean? And more importantly, why aren't you good already? Epictetus had no patience for students who treated philosophy as intellectual entertainment. He saw it as medicine for the soul, and medicine sometimes had to be bitter. If you wanted to sit in his school, you had to be prepared to have your comfortable assumptions shattered, to face truths about yourself that you'd been avoiding, to do the hard work of actually changing rather than just talking about change. One student who sat through these sessions and recorded them would preserve Epictetus's teaching for posterity. His name was Arrian, and he was exactly the kind of young aristocrat who might have seemed an unlikely match for a former slave-turned-philosopher. Born around 86 AD in the Greek city of Nicomedia, Arrian came from a wealthy family with Roman citizenship. He was destined for a distinguished career in imperial administration. He would eventually become governor of Cappadocia, a successful military commander, and a historian whose works on Alexander the Great would survive when many others were lost. But in his 20s, Arrian travelled to Nicopolis to study with Epictetus, and he brought with him a skill that would prove invaluable. He knew shorthand. During the lectures and discussions, Arrian took detailed notes. He captured not just the ideas, but the voice, the manner of speaking, the way Epictetus engaged with students. When he later compiled these notes into written form, he preserved something precious. The actual words of Epictetus, or as close as we can get to them. Arrian produced two works: the Discourses, a collection of Epictetus's longer teachings, arranged in 4 books, and the Enchiridion, a shorter handbook of key principles designed for practical use. These texts would become among the most influential philosophical works ever written, studied by emperors and slaves, by Christians and pagans, by soldiers and scholars across 2,000 years. But that influence was still in the future. In the 90s and early hundreds AD, Epictetus was simply teaching day after day, session after session, working with students who came seeking something they couldn't quite name. The school at Nicopolis wasn't a formal institution with buildings and endowments. It was more like an informal gathering around a teacher. Students would live in the city, rent rooms, and attend Epictetus's sessions. Some stayed for months, others for years. They'd discuss philosophy, practice the exercises Epictetus prescribed, and try to apply the teachings to their own lives. The curriculum, if it can be called that, centered on a few key practices. Students learned to distinguish between what was in their control and what wasn't. This distinction, which seems simple, was for Epictetus the foundation of all philosophy. Your opinions, your desires, your aversions, your impulses to act, these are in your control. Everything else, your body, your property, your reputation, other people's opinions, external events, these are not. Most people get this backwards. They spend their lives trying to control what they can't control, trying to force the external world to match their wishes. And they neglect what they can control, their own judgments and reactions. The result is constant frustration, anxiety, and disappointment. The wise person reverses this. She focuses entirely on what's within her power, her own thoughts and choices, and accepts everything else with equanimity. This doesn't mean not caring about anything external. It means not basing your well-being on things outside your control. Students practice this through various exercises. They'd imagine worst-case scenarios, rehearsing mentally how they'd respond if they lost their wealth, their health, their loved ones. Not to be morbid, but to prepare themselves psychologically, to ensure that their happiness didn't depend on fortune's favour. They'd examine their value judgments. When you feel upset about something, Epictetus would say, it's not the thing itself that upsets you, but your judgment about it. Someone insults you. The words themselves are just sounds. What disturbs you is your belief that the insult matters, that it has power to harm you. Change the belief, and the disturbance vanishes. They'd practice reframing events. Your business fails. Is this bad? Only if you judge it so. Perhaps it's an opportunity to test your character, to discover that you can be content with less, to redirect your energy towards something more worthwhile. The event itself is neutral. Your judgment makes it good or bad. This approach to philosophy was intensely practical. Epictetus had little interest in abstract metaphysics or logical puzzles for their own sake. He cared about how people lived, whether they could maintain their integrity under pressure, whether they could be free regardless of their circumstances, and he knew from experience that this was possible. He'd done it. He'd been a slave and remained free in his mind. He'd been maimed and refused to be diminished by it. He'd been exiled and built something new. The teachings weren't theory. They were the distillation of a life spent practicing what he preached. Among the students who passed through the school at Nicopolis, one would take the teachings further than anyone else. Marcus Aurelius never studied directly with Epictetus. He was born in 121 AD, likely after Epictetus had died. But he read the Discourses, studied them carefully, and absorbed their lessons so thoroughly that they shaped his entire life. Marcus was everything Epictetus wasn't. Born into the highest aristocracy, related by adoption to the Emperor Hadrian, destined from childhood for power. He became emperor in 161 AD and ruled for 19 years, facing wars, plagues, and betrayals. And through it all, he kept a private journal, where he recorded his attempts to live according to Stoic principles. These private notes, never intended for publication, survived as the Meditations. They're remarkable partly because they show an emperor, the most powerful man in the world, trying to live by the same philosophy that a former slave had taught. The circumstances were vastly different, but the principles were the same. Marcus reminds himself constantly of what Epictetus had taught, that externals don't matter, that the only real harm is harm to your character, that you must focus on what's in your control, and accept everything else. That death is nothing to fear because it's natural and inevitable. That the universe is rational and good, even when individual events seem cruel or senseless. Reading Marcus after reading Epictetus, you hear the echo, the slave's voice speaking through the emperor's pen. It's one of the most extraordinary transmissions in the history of philosophy. A teaching that began in the humblest circumstances, developed through decades of hardship, preserved by a faithful student, and then adopted by the man who ruled the world. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In the early years of the 2nd century, Epictetus was still teaching in Nicopolis. He was growing old now, probably in his 70s. The school continued to attract students, but he must have known that his time was limited. He never married, never had children. This was a deliberate choice. He believed that a philosopher's duty was to humanity as a whole, not just to a particular family. In a corrupt society, he argued, bringing children into the world might be irresponsible. Better to serve as a kind of scout, a witness to what a human being could be, showing others what was possible. Some later writers claimed he did eventually take a wife late in life, not for himself, but to care for a child who'd been abandoned. The story may be legend, but it fits his character. Epictetus saw himself as having a mission, to wake people up, to show them that they were enslaving themselves through false beliefs and unnecessary attachments, to demonstrate that freedom was possible regardless of external circumstances. This mission wasn't about building institutions or creating a formal school that would survive him. It was about transforming individuals, one conversation at a time. If even a few students truly understood, truly changed their lives, the teaching would continue. The form didn't matter. The truth did. As he aged, his body must have caused him increasing difficulty. The damaged leg, the general frailty that comes with years. But the mind remained sharp, the commitment unwavering. He continued teaching almost until the end. The exact date of his death is unknown. Sometime around 135 AD, probably in Nicopolis, Epictetus died. He was roughly 80 years old. He'd outlived Domitian, the emperor who'd exiled him. He'd seen the empire stabilize under Trajan and Hadrian. He'd taught for perhaps 40 years, influenced hundreds or thousands of students, and left behind a body of teaching that would outlast the empire itself. There was no grand funeral, no state honours. Freedmen, even famous philosophers, didn't receive such things. His possessions were few: a clay lamp, some simple furniture, basic clothing. He'd owned almost nothing because he'd needed almost nothing, but the words survived. Arrian's careful notes, compiled into the Discourses and the Enchiridion, began to circulate. Copies were made, students shared them, teachers used them. Within a generation, Epictetus had become one of the most widely read philosophers in the Roman world, and the words kept spreading. By the time Marcus Aurelius sat down to write his private notebooks in the 170s AD, Epictetus had been dead for 4 decades. But his influence was everywhere in Roman intellectual life. The Stoic revival that had begun with Musonius Rufus reached its peak in the 2nd century, and Epictetus stood at its centre. His teaching had an unusual quality. It was simultaneously radical and accessible. Radical because it inverted everything people believed about happiness and success. Accessible because it was expressed in plain language, through everyday examples, without technical jargon or elaborate arguments. A merchant could understand Epictetus. So could a senator. The teaching worked at every level. Consider what made his approach different from other philosophers of his era. Most philosophical schools had become academic enterprises. They debated fine points of logic, produced commentaries on ancient texts, competed for positions at wealthy households. Philosophy had become professionalized, domesticated, safe. Epictetus rejected all of that. For him, philosophy wasn't a career or an intellectual game. It was medicine for the soul. If you left a lecture entertained but unchanged, the lecture had failed. If you understood the teaching but didn't apply it, you'd wasted your time. The only measure that mattered was transformation. This practical focus explains why his teaching survived while others faded. People read Epictetus not to learn what ancient Greeks had thought, but to change how they themselves lived. The text wasn't historical, it was immediate. When you read, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens," you're not encountering ancient wisdom at a distance. You're being given instructions for today. But what exactly did people take from Epictetus? What changed when someone truly absorbed his teaching? The transformation happened in stages. First came recognition. Students realized they'd been living in a kind of trance, reacting automatically to events, pushed around by circumstances and other people's opinions. They'd thought they were making choices, but mostly they'd been running on scripts written by their culture, their family, their fears. Second came the discipline of assent. This was Epictetus's most practical tool. Every impression that enters your mind, he taught, carries with it an implicit judgment. Someone insults you, and immediately comes the judgment. This is terrible. I've been wronged. I should be angry. Epictetus taught students to pause at that moment. The insult is just words, sounds in the air. The judgment that you've been harmed is something you add, and you can choose not to add it. This wasn't about suppressing emotion or pretending nothing mattered. It was about seeing clearly what's actually happening versus the story you're telling yourself about it. The discipline of assent meant examining every impression before accepting it. Does this event really harm me? Is what I'm feeling based on reality or on my expectations? Am I responding to what's actually happening or to what I fear might happen? Third came the reorientation of desire. Most people, Epictetus observed, spend their lives wanting things they can't control. They want other people to behave certain ways, want circumstances to align with their preferences, want the universe itself to operate according to their personal wishes. This is guaranteed misery. You're setting yourself up to be disappointed by reality constantly. The solution isn't to want nothing, it's to want only what's genuinely up to you. Want to be honest, be courageous, be thoughtful, be kind. These are entirely within your power. Whether others appreciate it, whether you're rewarded for it, whether circumstances make it easy or hard, none of that affects whether you can actually be these things. Align your desires with your own character, and you become unbreakable. Fourth came acceptance of fate. This was perhaps the hardest teaching to internalize. Epictetus insisted that everything that happens for a reason within the rational structure of the universe. Your job isn't to approve or disapprove, but to work with what you're given. Someone close to you dies. A project fails. You lose something precious. The Stoic response isn't indifference. It's recognition that this event has happened, that wishing it hadn't happened changes nothing, and that your task now is to respond virtuously to what is. This sounds passive, but it's the opposite. When you stop fighting reality, you free up enormous energy. The person who rages against what cannot be changed exhausts themselves. The person who accepts what cannot be changed can focus completely on what can be changed, which is always and only their own response. Fifth came the expanded sense of human community. Epictetus taught that we're all parts of one body, citizens of one cosmic city. When you wrong someone, you're wronging yourself. When someone wrongs you, they're harming themselves, acting against their own nature. This isn't sentiment, it's recognition of how things actually work. We're social creatures. Our good is bound up with the good of others. The person who lives selfishly lives badly, even by selfish standards, because they cut themselves off from the connections that make human life meaningful. These weren't abstract principles. Epictetus taught them through situations his students actually faced. A student's father is difficult, demanding, impossible to please, what should the student do? Epictetus doesn't say abandon your father or pretend he's not difficult. He says recognize what's in your control, which is your own behaviour toward your father, and what's not, which is your father's character. Be the son you should be, regardless of whether that changes your father. Do your duty because it's your duty, not because you'll be rewarded with approval. Another student is afraid of travelling by sea. Epictetus asks what exactly he's afraid of. Drowning? Death isn't up to you. It will come when it comes whether you travel or not. The ship sinking? That's not up to you either. The only thing that's up to you is how you respond to the fear, whether you let it control you or whether you act according to reason, despite it. Face the fear, examine it, see it for what it is, just an impression, and suddenly it loses its power. The teaching spread because it worked, not in the sense of making people rich or famous or powerful, but in the sense of making them free. A student who really absorbed Epictetus became harder to manipulate, harder to frighten, harder to destabilize. External circumstances that would shatter others left them steady. Not because they were unfeeling, but because they'd learned to distinguish between what mattered and what didn't. What mattered was character. Everything else was indifferent. This was the technical Stoic term for things that are neither good nor bad in themselves. Health, wealth, reputation, these are all indifferents. You can prefer health to sickness, wealth to poverty, good reputation to bad. That's natural and reasonable, but none of these things can make you good or bad as a person. Only your choices do that, only how you use your will. This is why Epictetus could remain free while enslaved, and why many wealthy, powerful Romans were slaves despite never wearing chains. The Emperor Nero, who ruled when Epictetus was young, had unlimited power and unlimited misery. He was enslaved to his appetites, his fears, his need for approval, his paranoia. All the power in the world couldn't free him because he was imprisoned by his own character. Meanwhile, a crippled freedman teaching in a provincial city had achieved something Nero never could: complete independence. Not from society, Epictetus participated fully in his community. Not from other people, he clearly cared about his students, but independence from the tyranny of external circumstances. He'd found the one thing that can't be taken away: excellence of character, and built his entire life on that foundation. The paradox of Stoicism is that it makes you more engaged with life, not less. When you stop being controlled by fear of loss, you can love more freely. When you stop being controlled by desire for gain, you can give more generously. When you stop being controlled by need for approval, you can speak truth more clearly. The detachment isn't coldness, it's liberation to care about what actually matters. By the mid-2nd century, educated Romans were reading Epictetus alongside Plato and Aristotle. Copies of the Discourses were expensive, hand-copied by scribes, but they circulated widely. The Enchiridion, being shorter, spread even faster. It became a kind of handbook that people carried with them, consulted during difficult times, memorized passages from. The text was doing exactly what Epictetus had hoped. It was functioning as a tool for transformation. But the teaching didn't just spread through texts, it spread through people. Students who'd studied with Epictetus went on to teach others. They didn't necessarily call themselves Stoics or start formal schools. They simply lived differently, and when people asked why, they explained. This organic transmission might be more important than the written record. Philosophy isn't finally about books, it's about lives. What kind of lives did Epictetus's students lead? We know about a few. Arrian became a successful military commander and provincial governor, applying Stoic principles to leadership and administration. Others whose names are lost must have been farmers, merchants, soldiers, parents, ordinary people trying to live well. The teaching was designed for them as much as for anyone. This democratic quality sets Epictetus apart from most ancient philosophers. Plato wrote for intellectuals. Aristotle wrote for scholars. The Epicureans created communities that were somewhat exclusive. Epictetus taught principles that anyone could use regardless of education, class, or circumstance. You don't need to understand complex metaphysics. You need to distinguish what's up to you from what isn't. You don't need years of training. You need to start paying attention to your judgments. The simplicity was deceptive, though. The teaching was easy to understand, hard to apply. Knowing that you should focus on what you control is one thing. Actually doing it moment by moment, especially when emotions are running high, is something else entirely. Epictetus knew this. He expected students to struggle. The point wasn't to achieve perfect Stoic wisdom instantly. The point was to keep practicing, keep catching yourself, keep choosing better. He used athletic metaphors constantly. A wrestler doesn't expect to be unbeatable after one training session. A musician doesn't expect to master an instrument in a week. Moral development takes the same kind of sustained practice. You'll fail repeatedly. That's not a problem. That's the process. Each failure is information. Each time you notice yourself being controlled by something external, that's progress. You're becoming more aware. This emphasis on practice over theory explains why Epictetus spent so little time on abstract philosophy. Other Stoics wrote elaborate treatises on logic, physics, and metaphysics. Epictetus barely mentioned these subjects. Not because he thought they were unimportant, but because most people didn't need them. What people needed was help with the immediate problems of living. How to handle a difficult relationship, how to cope with loss, how to make decisions under uncertainty, how to maintain integrity under pressure. These aren't philosophical questions in the academic sense. They're human questions, and Epictetus treated them with the seriousness they deserve. When a student asked about some technical point of Stoic doctrine, Epictetus often redirected the conversation. Why do you want to know this? How will it help you live better? If the answer was that it wouldn't, then it wasn't worth discussing. Philosophy without practical application was just empty talk. This attitude made him enemies among more traditional philosophers. They accused him of vulgarizing Stoicism, of dumbing it down, of abandoning the sophisticated, theoretical framework that earlier Stoics had built. Epictetus didn't care. He wasn't trying to impress academics. He was trying to help people. If that meant simplifying, then he'd simplify. Better a simple teaching that transforms lives than a complex one that impresses colleagues. The test of any philosophy, he insisted, is how you live when circumstances turn difficult. Does your philosophy help you face death calmly? Does it help you treat people well, even when they treat you badly? Does it help you maintain your integrity when lying would be profitable? If not, then however elegant your theories, they're useless. This ruthlessly practical standard meant Epictetus had little patience for philosophical tourism. People who came to lectures to be entertained, who collected interesting ideas the way others collected art, who wanted to seem wise without doing the hard work of becoming wise. He challenged these people directly, sometimes harshly. Philosophy isn't a spectator sport. Either commit to transformation or stop wasting everyone's time. This uncompromising approach separated the serious students from the dilettantes. Those who stayed did so because they were ready to change, not just to learn interesting theories. They understood that Epictetus was offering something harder and more valuable than intellectual entertainment. He was offering a method for living. The classroom sessions followed a pattern. Epictetus would take a common situation, something everyone recognized from daily life, and dissect it philosophically. Someone insults you at a party. Your business partner cheats you. You lose money on an investment. A family member disappoints you. These weren't hypothetical scenarios. They were real problems his students faced. He'd ask questions. What upset you about the insult? The words themselves or your judgment that you'd been diminished? What's actually under your control in the situation with your business partner? What would it look like to respond virtuously rather than reactively. The students would answer, often badly at first. Epictetus would correct them, push them, show them where their thinking went wrong. The goal wasn't to win the argument, it was to train their minds to make better distinctions in the moment. Between formal sessions, students were expected to practice. They'd keep journals, noting situations where they succeeded or failed to apply Stoic principles. They'd discuss cases with each other, helping one another spot faulty reasoning. They'd memorize key teachings so the ideas would be available when emotions threatened to overwhelm judgment. This was philosophy as a daily discipline, not an occasional intellectual exercise. You didn't study Stoicism the way you might study history or mathematics, acquiring knowledge to be stored away. You practiced it the way an athlete trains, building habits that would hold up under pressure. Arrian, the student who later recorded Epictetus's teachings, captured this atmosphere perfectly. The Discourses read like transcripts of actual conversations, complete with interruptions, digressions, and the occasional frustrated outburst when a student missed the point. Reading them, you can almost hear Epictetus's voice, urgent and direct, never letting anyone off the hook. One teaching stands out for its psychological sophistication. Epictetus distinguished between immediate reactions and considered judgments. When something happens, you'll have an automatic response. Someone insults you, and you feel a flash of anger. Someone praises you, and you feel a surge of pleasure. These initial reactions aren't under your control. They're just how human nervous systems work. What happens next is what matters. Do you endorse the reaction, feeding it with judgments that make it grow? Or do you observe it, recognize it for what it is, and choose a different response? The anger arrives uninvited, but what you do with it is entirely your choice. This distinction freed students from an impossible standard. You don't need to feel nothing. You need to not be controlled by what you feel. The sage isn't someone who never experiences difficult emotions. The sage is someone who doesn't let those emotions dictate their actions. Another crucial teaching involved premeditation of adversity. Epictetus encouraged students to mentally rehearse difficult situations before they occurred. Imagine losing your wealth. Imagine the death of someone you love. Imagine being exiled or imprisoned, not to torture yourself, but to prepare. When you've already considered how you'd want to respond to a catastrophe, you're less likely to be overwhelmed when it actually happens. The shock is reduced. You've already done some of the emotional processing. You know what principles you want to follow. This practice wasn't pessimism, it was realism. Bad things happen. Pretending otherwise just makes you more vulnerable when reality intrudes. Better to acknowledge that everything you have can be taken away. Everyone you love will eventually die. Every achievement can be destroyed. Once you've accepted this, you can enjoy what you have while you have it, without the false security that breeds anxiety. Students found this teaching difficult. Nobody wants to spend time imagining loss. But those who practiced it reported something unexpected. It didn't make them more fearful. It made them more present. When you know something is temporary, you appreciate it more fully while it lasts. The school attracted a diverse group. Some students were wealthy Romans who could afford to spend years studying philosophy. Others were poor freedmen like Epictetus himself, scraping together enough to survive while pursuing wisdom. Some were young men just beginning their adult lives. Others were middle-aged, seeking answers after conventional success had left them empty. What united them was dissatisfaction with the standard Roman approach to life. Rome in the early 2nd century offered plenty of opportunities for pleasure, wealth, and status. But many people, having achieved these things, found them insufficient. The satisfaction didn't last, the anxiety remained. There had to be something more. Epictetus offered an alternative value system. Instead of pursuing external goods that could be lost, pursue internal development that couldn't be taken away. Instead of seeking to control other people and circumstances, learn to control yourself. Instead of measuring success by what you have, measure it by who you are. This message resonated particularly with people who'd experienced significant reversals. Someone who'd been wealthy and lost everything understood that external goods were unstable. Someone who'd been powerful and fallen from favour knew that status was temporary. These experiences, painful as they were, made Stoic teaching seem less like abstract philosophy and more like practical wisdom. The former slaves in the school had a particular advantage. They'd already learned the hardest way possible that they couldn't control their circumstances. They'd been treated as property, subject to the whims of their owners. If they'd survived that experience with their humanity intact, they'd already accomplished something most free Romans never would. They'd learned to maintain dignity in undignified conditions. Epictetus drew on his own experience constantly. He knew what it was like to be powerless, to be hurt, to be treated as less than human. He also knew that even in those circumstances, something remained under his control. His thoughts, his judgments, his commitment to living well despite everything. This wasn't theoretical knowledge. He'd tested it under the worst conditions and found it held. This credibility gave his teaching unusual force. When he said that external circumstances don't determine your happiness, he wasn't speaking from a position of privilege and ignorance. He was speaking from experience. He'd been at the bottom and he'd found freedom there. If he could do it, anyone could. Students sometimes push back. That's easy for you to say now that you're free and respected. What about when you were a slave? Did Stoicism really help then? Epictetus never claimed his years as a slave were pleasant. He didn't romanticize suffering, but he insisted that even then, he'd had choices about how to respond, what meaning to give his circumstances, what kind of person to be. The permanent injury to his leg served as a constant reminder. Some accounts say his master broke it deliberately. Others say it was damaged through neglect or an accident. Whatever the cause, Epictetus limped for the rest of his life. He could have become bitter, could have let that injury define him. Instead, he used it as a teaching tool. This leg doesn't belong to me in the sense that it's completely under my control. It can be damaged, and I can't prevent that. But how I relate to the injury, whether I let it make me resentful or accept it as part of life, that's up to me. The physical disability also protected him from certain temptations. He couldn't pursue an athletic career or a military career. Many traditional Roman paths to glory were closed to him. This forced focus might have been a gift. With fewer external options, the internal path became more obvious. Around the school, a community formed. Students didn't just attend lectures and leave. They lived together, ate together, supported each other through the difficult work of self-transformation. They became each other's mirrors, pointing out inconsistencies between professed values and actual behaviour. This could be uncomfortable, but it was necessary. Self-deception is easy. Having others hold you accountable makes it harder. The community extended beyond the formal students. Local people would come to hear Epictetus speak. Travellers passing through Nicopolis would stop by. Former students would return for refresher courses or just to reconnect with the source of their practice. The school became a hub, spreading Stoic ideas throughout the Roman world. Epictetus never wrote anything himself. He saw writing as a distraction from the real work of philosophy, which was living well and helping others do the same. Everything we have from him comes through Arrian, who attended the school and took notes. Arrian later shaped these notes into the Discourses and distilled their essence into a shorter handbook called the Enchiridion. This transmission through a devoted student had an unexpected benefit. Arrian wasn't trying to create a systematic philosophical text. He was trying to capture what it was actually like to study with Epictetus. The result feels immediate and alive in a way that more polished philosophical works often don't. You're not reading about philosophy, you're sitting in on the classes. The Enchiridion in particular became hugely influential. It's short, maybe 15,000 words, organised as a series of brief teachings and reminders. You can read it in an hour, But people spent lifetimes trying to live by it. Roman soldiers carried copies. Emperors studied it. Slaves found comfort in it. It crossed social boundaries because its message was genuinely universal. At the core of everything Epictetus taught was a simple question. What do you actually control? Not what do you wish you controlled, not what you think you should control, but what do you actually control? Be ruthlessly honest. The list is shorter than most people want to admit. You control your judgments, your actions, your responses. That's about it. Everything else is ultimately in the hands of fate, circumstances, other people, the laws of nature. You can influence some of these things sometimes, but you can't control them. The weather will do what it does. Other people will make their own choices. Your body will age and eventually fail. Fighting against these realities is futile and exhausting. Once you accept this, a strange thing happens. Instead of feeling powerless, you feel liberated. You stop wasting energy on things you can't change. You focus all your attention and effort on the one domain where you have genuine power. Your own mind, your own character, your own choices. This is enough. This is everything. Students would object. But doesn't this mean accepting injustice? Doesn't it mean not fighting for change? Epictetus's answer was nuanced. You absolutely should work to improve the world. You should oppose injustice, help people in need, make things better where you can. But do these things because they're right, not because you're attached to a particular outcome. Work for justice without demanding that justice prevail. Help people without requiring gratitude. Make things better without needing recognition. This distinction is subtle but crucial. You can act powerfully in the world while remaining internally free. You can care deeply about outcomes while not being destroyed if things don't go your way. The key is knowing what you're responsible for and what you're not. You're responsible for acting virtuously. You're not responsible for whether your virtuous actions produce the results you hope for. This teaching had particular relevance in Rome, where political fortunes could change overnight. Today's powerful senator could be tomorrow's exile. The emperor's favour could evaporate without warning. Building your happiness on such unstable foundations was insane. Better to build it on something that couldn't be taken away. Your character is the only thing that can't be confiscated, exiled, or destroyed by fire. It goes with you wherever circumstances force you to go. Epictetus hammered this point home relentlessly. Students needed to understand it viscerally, not just intellectually. He'd pose scenarios. Imagine your property is seized. What have you actually lost? Wood, stone, metal, things you never truly owned, only temporarily used. Your character remains intact. Imagine you're thrown in prison. What's been taken? Your freedom of movement, your ability to choose your response to imprisonment? Still yours. Imagine even your life is threatened. Can death touch your integrity? Can it corrupt your choices in your final moments? Only you can do that. This wasn't abstract theorizing. Epictetus had lived this. The leg chains were real. The beatings were real. The absolute powerlessness of his situation was real. And yet he'd emerged from slavery with his mind free. That freedom hadn't been given to him. He'd claimed it by understanding what truly belonged to him. He'd tell students that most people are walking around as slaves even when they're technically free. They're enslaved to their desires, to other people's opinions, to their fears about the future, to their regrets about the past. A slave who understands the dichotomy of control is freer than a king who doesn't. Consider passion, not in the modern sense of enthusiasm, but in the Stoic sense of unhealthy emotion, rage, consuming grief, panic, obsessive desire. Where do these come from? From judging external things as absolutely essential to your well-being. You believe you must have this job, this relationship, this outcome, or your life is ruined. That belief makes you a slave. The cure isn't to stop caring, it's to care properly. Value things appropriately. Prefer good outcomes, but don't demand them. Work for what you want, but accept what you get. Love people deeply, but acknowledge their mortality and fallibility. This might sound cold, it's actually the opposite. When you're not desperately clutching at people and things, you can appreciate them fully. When you're not terrified of loss, you can be present for what you have. Students who just arrived would push back hard. One story survives about a young man who dismissed all this as pointless hair-splitting. He wanted to know about the big philosophical questions, the nature of the gods, the structure of the cosmos, whether the soul was immortal. Epictetus let him talk himself out. Then he asked a simple question. While you're debating the nature of the gods, you're getting angry at your servant. While you're pondering cosmic structure, you're anxious about money. While you're discussing the immortal soul, you're devastated that someone criticized you at dinner. Which matters more? Abstract knowledge about the universe, or actually living well right now? The young man had no answer. Epictetus pressed the point. You can have the most sophisticated theories about virtue, but if you fly into a rage when your soup is cold, what's the value? You can write treatises on happiness, but if you're miserable when things don't go your way, you've missed everything. Philosophy isn't about knowing, it's about being and doing. This insistence on practice over theory set Epictetus apart. He wasn't interested in creating clever arguments. He wanted to produce people who actually lived differently. The school wasn't a lecture hall, it was a training ground. He'd assign exercises, spend a day treating everything that happens as if you'd chosen it, practice responding to insults with calm curiosity instead of anger. Deliberately use cheap dishes and plain clothes for a week to remind yourself that luxury isn't necessary. These weren't punishments, they were experiments in freedom. Some exercises were internal. When you want something, pause and examine the desire. What are you actually after? A promotion at work might really be about seeking status and security. Unpack that. Status is someone else's judgment. Security is largely an illusion. Do you still want to organize your life around pursuing these things? Maybe you do, that's fine. But at least know what you're doing and why. Other exercises were social. Epictetus told students to practice being misunderstood. Say something true and watch how people react. Don't defend yourself. Don't try to correct their misinterpretation. Just notice what it feels like to let other people be wrong about you. It's incredibly freeing once you get used to it. He encouraged students to regularly contemplate loss. Not morbidly, but realistically. Everyone you love will die, probably before you're ready. Your health will fail eventually. Your possessions will be lost or destroyed. These aren't pessimistic thoughts, they're facts. Facing them honestly makes you appreciate what you have and prepares you for inevitable change. This practice, premeditatio malorum, imagining future evils, seems depressing to modern ears. But students found it oddly comforting. The worst had already happened in imagination. When difficulties arrived in reality, they weren't shocking. There was a plan, a response prepared. You'd already decided how to handle this. Epictetus himself modelled this constantly. His poverty wasn't something he complained about. His disability wasn't something he hid. His past as a slave wasn't something he was ashamed of. These were just facts about his circumstances. They had no power to diminish him unless he gave them that power. Visitors to the school were often struck by this. Here was a man who owned almost nothing, living in a simple room, eating plain food, getting around with difficulty. By conventional standards, his life was pitiable. In person, he radiated something that looked a lot like joy, not the manic happiness of someone desperately avoiding reality, but the deep contentment of someone who'd made peace with existence on its own terms. Students who stayed long enough began to understand. Freedom wasn't out there somewhere, waiting to be achieved when circumstances finally aligned. It was available right now, in this moment, regardless of circumstances. You just had to stop demanding that reality be different from what it was. This didn't mean passive acceptance of evil. Epictetus was clear about that. If you witness injustice and can safely oppose it, you should. If someone needs help and you can provide it, you must. These are part of the role you've been given as a human being, but do these things without internal resistance to the fact that injustice and suffering exist. Do them without requiring success. Do them because they're right, period. One teaching captured this perfectly. You're an actor in a play. The playwright, fate assigns you a role. You might be a king or a beggar. That's not your choice. What is your choice? How well you play the part. A good actor doesn't complain about their role. They don't refuse to perform because they wanted a different character. They take what they're given and do it excellently. Your life is the role. Maybe you got a difficult one. Maybe it's shorter than you'd like. Maybe it involves hardships you wouldn't have chosen. None of that matters. What matters is whether you perform with integrity. When the play ends and you exit the stage, the only relevant question is whether you acted well. Students would sit with these ideas for months, years. The concepts were simple. Living them was hard. Epictetus knew this. He'd spent decades working on himself. He wasn't preaching from a position of mastery, but from ongoing practice. Some days were better than others. Some situations triggered old patterns. The work never finished, but it got easier. Students who stuck with it reported a gradual shift. Things that used to devastate them became manageable. Setbacks that would have sent them spiraling were now just information. They still preferred good outcomes to bad ones, obviously, but their well-being wasn't hostage to those outcomes anymore. The school attracted all kinds, young aristocrats whose parents hoped philosophy would settle them down. Middle-aged men having crises and seeking meaning, older students wanting to prepare properly for death, former soldiers, former merchants, former everything. Epictetus treated them equally. What mattered wasn't your background, but your willingness to be honest with yourself. Could you admit when you were wrong? Could you recognize your own self-deception? Could you do the uncomfortable work of changing ingrained patterns? If yes, you could make progress. If no, you'd just be wasting everyone's time, especially your own. Some students would arrive with elaborate questions about abstract philosophy. Epictetus would cut through immediately. Before we discuss the nature of the good, let's address why you lost your temper this morning. Before we debate free will, let's work on why you're so anxious about money. Start with what's actually happening in your life right now. This frustrated the intellectually ambitious ones. They wanted grand theories. Epictetus kept dragging them back to specifics. How did you respond when your friend disappointed you? What went through your mind when you heard bad news? What are you actually doing with your days? These seemed like small questions. They were everything. Because philosophy, as Epictetus taught it, wasn't a subject you studied. It was a way you lived. You couldn't separate the teaching from the practice. Knowledge that didn't change behavior wasn't knowledge at all, just mental clutter. He'd sometimes use himself as an example. I was a slave. I couldn't change that. I had a crippled leg. I couldn't change that. I owned nothing. I couldn't change that. What could I change? My judgments about these facts, and that changed everything. The other students would see him daily, managing his disability without complaint, living simply without resentment, teaching with energy despite his age. The example was as important as the words, maybe more important. Anyone can talk about virtue. Showing it in action consistently, regardless of circumstances, that's rare. As Epictetus aged, he must have known his time was running out. He'd never written anything himself. His teachings would survive only if students preserved them. He'd trained Arrian well, but there were no guarantees. Most philosophical schools vanished within a generation of the founder's death. Their ideas scattered, their practices forgotten. He couldn't control that. He could only keep teaching while he was able, so that's what he did. Day after day, as long as students came, he taught. Not because he expected fame or legacy, but because teaching was his role, and he'd play it well until the end. The school in Nicopolis continued for some years after his death, but eventually closed. The building was repurposed, the students scattered, the direct lineage ended. But the ideas didn't die. They spread through the copies of Arrian's notes, through students who taught others, through the slow underground network of people seeking wisdom in troubled times. One of those people would change everything. He was a young man in Rome, brilliant and melancholy, trapped in circumstances he couldn't control. He'd discover Epictetus's teachings at exactly the moment he needed them most. And he'd take these ideas from a provincial school to the centre of the world's greatest empire. Picture this: you're 25 years old, you've just been adopted by the Roman emperor. In a single moment, your entire life has been rewritten. You went from being a promising aristocrat to being next in line for absolute power over an empire that stretches from Britain to Mesopotamia. From the Rhine to the Sahara, most people would celebrate. Marcus felt dread. He'd been reading philosophy since childhood. Not as decoration for dinner parties, but seriously, the Stoics especially. He'd read Chrysippus, Zeno, Seneca, and recently he'd discovered something that cut deeper than all of them: the teachings of a former slave named Epictetus. We don't know exactly when Marcus first encountered those ideas, but we know they hit him like a lightning strike. Here was someone who'd lived through actual hell and found not just survival, but serenity. Someone who'd owned nothing and lost everything, and still maintained that the only thing that mattered was your own character. Marcus needed that, because what was about to happen to him would break most people. The adoption came in 138 AD. The Emperor Hadrian was dying and needed a successor. He chose Antoninus Pius, a stable, competent senator. But Hadrian added a condition. Antoninus had to adopt 2 boys. One was Lucius Verus, the son of Hadrian's original choice who died. The other was Marcus, Antoninus's nephew. So Marcus at 17 became heir to the throne. At 25, when Antoninus died, he became emperor. He'd spent 8 years watching how power worked. He'd seen the compromises, the corruption, the way absolute authority twisted people. And now it was his turn. Everything Epictetus taught said that external circumstances don't matter. Only your response to them matters. Marcus was about to test whether that was actually true. Could you maintain your principles while holding supreme power? Could you stay rational while everyone around you lied, flattered, and schemed? Could you remember you were just a human being when millions treated you like a god? The job description was impossible. Emperor of Rome meant military commander, chief legislator, supreme judge, religious authority, and diplomatic representative. You were personally responsible for the security of 50 million people spread across 3 continents. You made decisions that meant life or death for thousands. And you did all this with information that was always incomplete, and advisors who always had agendas. Plus, you were expected to produce an heir, maintain the dynasty. Marcus married Faustina, daughter of Antoninus. They had at least 13 children. Most died young. Infant mortality was merciless even for emperors. Each death was a private agony he had to endure while still performing his public duties. Then there were the wars. Marcus spent more than half his reign on military campaigns. The Parthians invaded in the east. Germanic tribes crossed the Danube in the north. The empire was under pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. Marcus, who wanted to be a philosopher, spent years in military camps along the frontier, managing logistics and strategy for wars he hadn't started and couldn't avoid. Oh, and a plague. A devastating pandemic swept through the empire during his reign, killing millions. Possibly smallpox, though we can't be certain. It ravaged the army, depopulated cities, and created social chaos. Marcus had to manage a public health crisis with Iron Age medical knowledge. His co-emperor, Lucius Verus, forced on him by Hadrian's adoption decree, was unreliable. Charming but shallow. good at parties, less good at governing. He died in 169, possibly from the plague, leaving Marcus to rule alone. And through all of this, Marcus kept a private journal. He never intended to publish it. These were notes to himself, written in Greek, usually late at night, in a military tent or a temporary headquarters. Reminders of Stoic principles, attempts to process what he was experiencing, efforts to maintain his sanity while carrying the weight of empire. We call it the Meditations now. But Marcus didn't give it a title. Later scribes labelled it to himself. That's what it was, a conversation between Marcus the man and Marcus the emperor, between the person who wanted to be good and the person who had to make impossible choices. The opening is telling. Book 1 is a list of people Marcus learned from. His grandfather taught him good character and self-control. His mother taught him piety and generosity. Various teachers taught him various virtues. And from Rusticus, one of his philosophy tutors, he received the works of Epictetus. That's the only time Marcus names a specific philosophical text in the entire journal. Epictetus mattered to him more than anyone else. The slave's teachings became the emperor's handbook. But Marcus wasn't just copying Epictetus. He was adapting those ideas to circumstances Epictetus never faced. Running an empire while trying to stay virtuous. That was new territory. Some of the Meditations reads like pure Epictetus. You have power over your mind, not external events. Realize this and you'll find strength. That's straight from the handbook. The obstacle to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That's Epictetus's principle about using adversity as training material. But Marcus also wrestled with questions Epictetus didn't emphasize. How do you stay compassionate when dealing with corruption and stupidity daily? How do you maintain your sense of common humanity when everyone treats you as separate from humanity? How do you remember you're mortal when you're worshipped as divine? The journal shows someone trying very hard not to become a monster. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They're like this because they don't know good from evil. But I've recognized the nature of good and evil, so none of them can hurt me. That's not arrogance, that's a defensive strategy. Marcus was surrounded by people who wanted things from him, who lied to him, who plotted against him. He had to protect his mind from becoming cynical or cruel. The Stoic principles were armor. He also used them to maintain perspective. Think of yourself as dead. You've lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. Another entry, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Memento mori, remember death, was central to his practice, not morbidly, but as a way to focus on what mattered. Because here's what the Emperor of Rome knew that most people never grasp. The things we chase, status, wealth, pleasure, they don't satisfy. Marcus had them all. Unlimited power, vast wealth, access to every luxury the ancient world offered. And he could see clearly that none of it made him happier or better. People who love fame imagine the admiration of others is good. People who love pleasure imagine physical satisfaction is good. But if you love what's genuinely good, you won't care about either. He tested the hypothesis empirically. He had everything. It wasn't enough. Only character mattered. The empire kept grinding away at him. His generals sometimes won, sometimes lost. The plague continued its devastation. His wife Faustina, rumours said, was unfaithful. We don't know if that's true. Ancient sources loved gossip about imperial women. What we know is Marcus never spoke against her publicly and mourned deeply when she died in 175. That same year, one of his most trusted generals, Avidius Cassius, declared himself emperor. Cassius commanded the Eastern legions and apparently believed Marcus had died, or maybe just saw an opportunity. Either way, it was civil war, or would have been, except Cassius was assassinated by his own officers before Marcus could respond. Marcus refused to celebrate the assassination. He refused to punish Cassius's family. He burned all the letters that had been seized showing who had supported the rebellion, unread. He didn't want to know. "Let it be forgotten," he said. "Move forward. That's not weakness. That's strength under impossible pressure." The normal response would be paranoia, purges, revenge. Marcus chose amnesty. Because what would Epictetus do? Control what you can control. Your response, your principles, nothing else. The Germanic wars dragged on. Marcus spent years on the Danube frontier. Cold, wet, uncomfortable conditions. He was sick frequently. His health was never robust. But he stayed with the army because that's what the job required. He negotiated, he strategized, he made the decisions that only the emperor could make. And at night, by lamplight in his headquarters tent, he wrote in his journal. Not about military tactics or political strategy, about staying sane, about remembering what mattered, about not letting the circumstances change who he was. Some of it is heartbreaking. Nowhere can you find a more peaceful and quiet retreat than in your own soul. That's someone desperate for peace and finding none in the external world. So he retreats inward, the only sanctuary that can't be taken from him. Or this one. How much time he gains who doesn't look to see what his neighbour says or does or thinks, but only at what he does himself, to make it just and holy. That's exhaustion talking. The exhaustion of someone who's watched too many people behave badly and has to consciously stop himself from being dragged down to their level. But he keeps going, because that's what you do. The job isn't finished just because you're tired. Confine yourself to the present, if you can. That's not mysticism. That's survival advice. The past is done. The future is uncertain. All you have is right now. Focus there. He had one great fear, that he'd fail. That despite all his efforts, he'd become the kind of emperor he despised. Corrupt, cruel, disconnected from reality. So he kept checking himself. Don't be stained purple by the imperial dye. It happens. That's a warning. Power corrupts. You're not immune. Stay vigilant. His son Commodus was a problem. Marcus had broken the tradition of adopting a capable successor. He chose blood instead. Commodus showed signs early of being unsuitable. Vain, violent, unstable. Marcus knew it. But what could he do? Disinherit his own son? That would trigger civil war. So he hoped. He trained. He tried to prepare Commodus for responsibility. It didn't work. Commodus would become one of Rome's worst emperors. Cruel, erratic, ultimately assassinated. Everything Marcus tried to prevent. The philosopher emperor's greatest failure was his heir. But that came later. In March of 180 AD, Marcus was 58 years old. He'd been emperor for 19 years. He was exhausted, sick, worn down by decades of impossible responsibility. The Germanic campaigns were finally winding down. Maybe he could rest soon. Maybe he could return to Rome. Maybe. The illness got worse quickly. Probably the plague that had ravaged the empire finally caught him. He refused food, trying to die faster. Not from despair, from practicality. He was done. The job had consumed everything he had to give. His last words, according to sources, were addressed to the soldiers around his deathbed. "Weep not for me. Think rather of the pestilence and the deaths of so many others." Even dying, he was trying to maintain perspective. His suffering wasn't special. Everyone suffers. Everyone dies. Then he pulled the covers over his head, a small gesture of privacy in a life that had allowed none. And Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, student of Epictetus, was gone. The journal survived by accident. Someone preserved it, copied it, passed it on. For centuries it circulated among people who needed exactly what Marcus needed. A way to maintain integrity under pressure, a way to stay human when circumstances tried to make you something else. A way to remember what mattered when everything was pulling you in different directions. Epictetus would have been proud. His student had taken the teachings into the hardest test imaginable and hadn't broken. Marcus had proven that Stoicism wasn't just theory, it worked even at the top of the pyramid, even when you had everything to lose. The book almost didn't matter. For centuries after Marcus died, the Meditations was just another ancient text. Scholars knew about it. Philosophers referenced it occasionally, but it wasn't essential reading. It wasn't the Stoic text everyone turned to when they needed guidance. Then modernity happened. The 20th century arrived with its wars and genocides and technological acceleration. Everything got faster, louder, more complicated. The old certainties collapsed. Religion lost its grip on educated minds. Political ideologies promised utopia and delivered hell. The individual found themselves alone in a universe that seemed indifferent to their existence. And suddenly Marcus Aurelius made sense again. The Meditations spoke directly to people who felt overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. It didn't promise salvation. It didn't offer easy answers. It just said, "This is hard. You're going to suffer. Here's how to maintain dignity anyway." That resonated. During World War II, soldiers carried copies in their packs. Prisoners in concentration camps found comfort in Marcus's words about endurance. Leaders facing impossible decisions read him for perspective. The journal written by a man who'd been dead for 17 centuries became urgently relevant again. Why? Because the problems hadn't changed. The scale was different, the technology was different, but the fundamental human situation remained identical. You're thrown into circumstances you didn't choose. You're responsible for things you can't fully control. You're going to fail sometimes despite your best efforts. You're going to die. So what do? Marcus had an answer. Not a solution, an answer. You focus on what's within your power. You maintain your principles. You treat others with justice and kindness. You accept what you cannot change. You keep going. Modern psychology stumbled onto the same conclusions from a different direction. Cognitive behavioral therapy, developed in the mid-20th century, teaches techniques that Stoics had been practicing for 2,000 years. Identify irrational thoughts, challenge them, replace them with more accurate assessments, focus on what you can control. The therapists thought they'd discovered something new. They'd just rediscovered Epictetus. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote about finding meaning in suffering. He described prisoners in the camps who maintained their humanity despite everything, who chose how to respond even when they couldn't control what happened to them. He developed an entire therapeutic approach around this insight. He was describing Stoicism without using the word. The business world discovered Marcus in the late 20th century. CEOs started quoting the Meditations in keynote speeches. Leadership consultants recommended it. Silicon Valley founders kept copies on their desks next to books about lean startups and growth hacking. This made some people uncomfortable. Wasn't Stoicism supposed to be about virtue and wisdom? What did it have to do with quarterly earnings and market share? But Marcus would have understood. He was running an empire. He dealt with budgets, personnel problems, strategic planning. The Meditations isn't abstract philosophy. It's a practical guide for people carrying heavy responsibilities. Of course, executives found it useful. The question is whether they understood it correctly, because there's a version of Stoicism that's popular now, which would have horrified Marcus and Epictetus. The version that says, "Be tough, don't show weakness, grind through the pain, emotions are for losers." The version that treats Stoicism as a tool for winning rather than a philosophy for living well. That's not Stoicism. That's just hardness wearing philosophy's clothes. Real Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about not being controlled by them. It isn't about winning. It's about maintaining virtue regardless of outcomes. It isn't about toughness. It's about wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control. Marcus cried when friends died. He grieved his children. He felt fear and frustration and weariness. The Meditations is full of those emotions. He just didn't let them dictate his choices. There's a difference between feeling your emotions and being ruled by them. Modern pseudo-Stoicism collapses that distinction. It tells you not to feel. Marcus would tell you, feel everything, just don't let it make you unjust. The real legacy isn't in boardrooms or self-help books. It's in individuals who find themselves in impossible situations and remember that they still have choices. The nurse working a third consecutive double shift, who treats patients with dignity despite exhaustion. That's Marcus's legacy. The parent who stays calm when their child is having a meltdown in the grocery store, because they know anger won't help. That's Epictetus's teaching. The person who loses everything and decides who they're going to be in response. That's Stoicism working. You don't need to be an emperor or a philosopher. You just need to be someone who's been dealt a difficult hand and refuses to let circumstances determine their character. The Meditations ends abruptly. No grand conclusion, no summary of lessons learned. Marcus was writing for himself, not posterity. When he filled the last page, he stopped. The final entry is about not being stained by the imperial dye. Stay humble. Remember you're human. Don't let power corrupt you. Then nothing. He probably set the journal aside, dealt with whatever crisis needed attention, and died a few weeks later without knowing anyone else would read his private notes. That's fitting, because the whole point of Stoicism is that you do the work regardless of recognition. You maintain your principles even when no one's watching. You try to be good not for applause, but because that's what rational beings do. Marcus died. Rome continued without him. Commodus undid much of his father's work. The empire declined. Eventually it fell. None of the external accomplishments lasted. But the journal survived. The ideas survived. The example survived. 2,000 years later, people still read Marcus Aurelius and find something that helps. Not because he was perfect, he wasn't. Not because he solved every problem, he didn't. Because he showed that it's possible to maintain your humanity under terrible pressure. That wisdom matters more than power, that how you handle adversity defines you more than the adversity itself. Epictetus would have been satisfied with that. His student learned well, took the teachings into the hardest test imaginable, and came out intact. Proved that philosophy wasn't just classroom theory, it worked in practice. Even at the top, even when everything was at stake. The chain continues. Musonius taught Epictetus. Epictetus taught Marcus. Marcus teaches us, not through any direct connection, through words written in private that somehow reached across centuries. You're part of that chain now. You've followed this story from a crippled slave in Nicopolis to an emperor in Rome. You've seen how ideas move through time, how they transform lives, how they survive when everything else crumbles. What you do with it is your choice. That's the whole point. Stoicism doesn't demand anything. It just offers tools, distinctions that help you think clearly, principles that help you act well, examples that show it's possible. The rest is up to you. Marcus would say, don't waste time arguing about what a good person is. Be one. Don't spend years planning to live according to philosophy. Start now. You've been given this moment, this situation, these circumstances. What are you going to do with them? Epictetus would say, you're already equipped with everything necessary. Reason, the ability to choose your responses, the capacity for virtue. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. They're never coming. Work with what you have. Neither of them would care whether you called yourself a Stoic. Labels don't matter. Actions do. Character does. How you treat people does. Whether you maintained your integrity when it would have been easier to compromise. The Meditations isn't a book that solves your problems. It's a book that reminds you that everyone has problems and that how you handle them is what matters. Marcus had problems we can barely imagine. He handled them about as well as anyone could. Not perfectly. He made mistakes, he had regrets, but he kept trying. That's the standard, not perfection, persistent effort toward wisdom and virtue. Falling short and getting back up, maintaining principles when circumstances made it difficult, treating others justly even when you had the power to do otherwise. Simple ideas, extraordinarily hard to execute consistently. Marcus struggled with them his entire life. That's why the journal is full of reminders to himself. He had to keep relearning the lessons, keep catching himself when he slipped, keep adjusting his thinking when circumstances changed. You will too. Everyone does. That's not failure, that's the work. The story ends where it began, with someone trying to figure out how to live well in a world that doesn't make it easy. The slave in Nicopolis and the emperor in Rome faced different challenges, but asked the same questions. The answers they found still work, not because ancient wisdom is automatically superior, because human nature hasn't changed. We still struggle with the same fears, desires, and confusions that people struggled with 2,000 years ago. The external circumstances are different. The internal landscape is identical. So when you're facing something difficult, when you're overwhelmed by things you can't control, when you're tempted to compromise your principles because it would make life easier, remember that better people than you faced worse and maintained their integrity, not through superhuman strength, through philosophy, through clear thinking about what matters and what doesn't, through daily practice of distinguishing their choices from their circumstances, through deciding who they wanted to be and then trying to be that consistently. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD on the frontier of an empire that would eventually collapse. His body was burned according to custom. His ashes were returned to Rome and placed in the mausoleum of Hadrian. The building still stands. You can visit it. The ashes are long gone, but the words remain. The ideas remain. The example remains. That's what survives. Not the power, not the wealth, not the monuments. The thoughts written in private by someone trying to be better than their circumstances demanded. Epictetus was right. What's up to you is everything that matters. Your judgments, your actions, your character. The rest is just material for virtue to work with. Marcus proved him right. At the very top of the pyramid, with absolute power and crushing responsibility, the same principles worked. Control what you can control. Accept what you can't. Maintain justice and kindness. Keep going. 2,000 years. 2 men. A crippled slave and an all-powerful emperor. The same philosophy, the same struggles, the same solutions. Now you know the story. The chain has reached you. What you do with it is, as always, entirely up to you. Here's where most people expect the inspirational call to action. The part where I tell you to go out and apply these lessons. To be more stoic, to buy the books, to start your own journal. I'm not doing that. Because here's what actually happens when you hear a story like this. You feel moved for about 3 days, maybe a week if it really landed. You think about Epictetus and Marcus when something difficult comes up. You remind yourself that circumstances don't control you. Then life reasserts itself. The next crisis hits. You forget. You react badly. You get swept up in exactly the kind of thinking the Stoics warned against. You realize 6 months later that you haven't thought about any of this since the day you heard it. That's normal. That's what happened to most of Marcus's contemporaries too. They had access to these ideas and still lived badly. Physical proximity to wisdom doesn't transfer understanding. Neither does emotional resonance. The teaching either works or it doesn't, and you only find out by testing it against actual circumstances. Not by thinking about it, by using it when you're angry, scared, hurt, overwhelmed. Those moments reveal whether you understood anything or just enjoyed a good story. Epictetus died. Marcus died. Everyone who heard them teach directly died. The Roman Empire collapsed. The cities where they lived were destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. Everything External disappeared. What remained was the instruction manual. Use it or don't. That's the only choice that matters. The one thing that's genuinely up to you. The starry heavens above and the moral law within. That's what Marcus saw at the end. Not because he achieved perfect wisdom, because he kept looking, kept trying, kept failing and starting over, for 19 years as emperor and decades before that as a student. The work doesn't end. There's no graduation ceremony, no moment when you figured it all out, just the next decision and the one after that, each one an opportunity to be who you want to be or to be something less. Most people choose less, not because they're bad, because it's easier, because circumstances are hard and principles are demanding and nobody's keeping score anyway, except you are. You're keeping score. You know when you compromised, when you let fear dictate your choices, when you were cruel because you were hurt, when you avoided difficulty because facing it required more than you wanted to give. The Stoics just made that scorekeeping explicit, made it the central project of a human life, not achieving external success, maintaining internal coherence, being the person you decided to be regardless of what happened around you. It's an old idea, older than Epictetus, older than Rome, probably as old as the first human who looked at their own behaviour and thought, I could do better than this. The teaching survives because the problem survives. You're thrown into a world you didn't choose, given circumstances you can't fully control, asked to make choices with incomplete information, guaranteed to suffer and die eventually. What do you do with that? Complain, rage, despair, distract yourself until it's over? Or do you decide that within those constraints, you're going to be something specific? Just kind, rational, courageous. Not because it gets you anything, because that's what humans at their best actually are. Epictetus limped through Nicopolis, teaching students who mostly forgot what he said. Marcus sat in a tent on the Danube, writing notes to himself that he never expected anyone to read. Neither of them changed the world through force or genius or luck. They just refused to be changed by circumstances, maintained something essential, while everything around them was chaos. Left behind a record of that effort. That's the whole story. Someone decides to be decent despite everything. Does it imperfectly, for as long as they can. Dies, the example persists, if anyone cares enough to look. You looked. You followed a crippled slave from anonymity to influence. You watched an emperor try not to become a monster. You've seen what Stoicism actually looks like in practice. Not theory, not inspiration, just people working with what they had. Now you know what they knew. The distinction between what's yours and what isn't. The practice of examining your judgments. The discipline of responding rather than reacting. The acceptance of mortality and impermanence. The commitment to virtue regardless of outcome. That knowledge does nothing by itself. It's not magic. It won't solve your problems or make difficult things easy. It's just accurate information about how human minds work and what makes them functional versus dysfunctional. Whether you use it is between you and yourself. Nobody else will know. Nobody else can measure it. It's the one thing that's completely private. Your internal state. Your actual character beneath whatever face you show the world. Epictetus was a slave who died free. Marcus was an emperor who died exhausted. Both of them left behind the same message. You have less control than you think, and more power than you realize. Everything that matters is in that narrow space between what you wish was true and what you choose to do about what's actually true. The teaching is complete. The transmission is finished. What happens next is just your life, all of it, every choice, every reaction, every moment when you remember or forget what matters. That's not a conclusion, that's where it starts.